What happens when ancient wisdom meets a living language, when the sacred stories of scripture are retold through the rhythm, imagery, and worldview of indigenous peoples? Today on Lead with Storytelling, I'm joined by Terry M. Wildman, the lead translator, general editor, and project manager of the First Nations version and the newly released First Nations Psalms and Proverbs. Terry is of Ojibwe and Yaqui heritage and serves as the Director of Spiritual Growth and Leadership Development for Native InterVarsity. He's also the founder of Rain Ministries and has spent years as a pastor, worship leader, and storyteller, weaving together faith, culture, and language in deeply transformative ways. His work in the First Nations version has opened up a new lens for reading scripture, one that reflects the heart and voice of indigenous oral traditions while remaining faithful to the beauty of the biblical text. In this conversation, we explore what it means to translate not just words, but worlds, and how the process of storytelling and translation helps us listen more deeply to God, to culture, and to one another. We talk about the power of language to shape identity, the humility required in translation, and the spiritual wisdom embedded in the stories we tell and retell. Let's dive in. Hi, Terry.
Hey, it's good to be here. I'd like to give you an Ojibwe introduction that I was taught. I don't speak our language, and there's many reasons for that. Many of our people don't speak our language anymore, but we're working hard to reclaim those languages. But I've been taught this from one of my mentors. Buju and Deniwe Maganaduk. Anin. Niji Bemarazig. Gitchia Nimiki Minomashkiki Manadu Indigo Terry Wildman Nindishnakaz Niminua Yagaye Nimanwendam Uma Ayayan Nungum. So what I said was, hello, all my relations, all my relatives. I said, my friends who share this life together with me. I said, my native name that was given to me in ceremony is Gitchianimiki Manomashkiki Manadu. And I've carried that name for many, many years and received it in ceremony. But what it means is voice of great thunder with a good medicine spirit. But I'm also known as Terry Wildman. That's my birth name. And it's easier to live up to my birth name than it is to that wonderful name that was given to me for me to carry with honor. And so I like to introduce myself. It also said, it feels good to be here with you in this space we're in today, this place we're in today, which is digital, but yet it's a good space. It's a sacred space. It can be if we will treat it that way. I was born and raised in Michigan, the land of the Anishinaabe, which is the people. That's what Anishinaabe means. My ancestry includes Ojibwe from Ontario, Canada, Yaqui from Sonora, Mexico, as well as English, German, and Spanish. I'm married to Darlene Wildman and have 5 children, 8 grandchildren, 4 great-grandchildren. My wife and I currently live in Maricopa, Arizona, on the traditional lands of the Tohono O'odham, the Pima, and the Maricopa people. It's good to be here with you.
Thank you. It's good to have you. Again, what I love when we tap into our mother tongue and to our tradition, because it expresses words and feelings and thoughts at a depth that English may not sufficiently do so. So again, thank you so much for that very, very profound introduction. And I'm honored to have you here.
Thank you so
I think
much.
a good place to start is especially with regards to this wonderful project. I call it a very wonderful project because it's, through the course of this conversation, people will begin to see how important it is. Might be to share with us what inspired you to begin this journey of translation.
Well, the short version of that is my wife and I were living on the Hopi Indian reservation in northern Arizona. We were there with a mission organization wanting to share who Jesus is among the Hopi people, and learning that the traditional ways that evangelism has been done has not been effective among our indigenous peoples. And there's a lot of story behind that. And I learned some of that story while I lived among the Hopi for 5 years. My wife and I did. And the more I lived there, the more I listened, the more I became aware of what I call it problems, or the challenges of cross-cultural communication, and also the challenges of overcoming a missionary past that was not a positive experience for our indigenous peoples. And that was true across Turtle Island, which is what we call North America, Turtle Island, among all of our tribal nations and all of our people. So I was working hard to we were using standard Bible studies in our groups. We would go into the jail. We used standard Bible studies. We used the NIV translation. And I really saw that we weren't connecting. And I just began to wonder why. And as I met with other indigenous leaders, like Richard Twiss and others who were actually saying, we don't have to abandon our culture to follow Jesus, and that's what we had been taught. We had to abandon our culture. We had to become like the settlers, become like them in order to be accepted as a child of God, and there was little or no recognition that God, whom our creator, had been at work among our peoples for hundreds of generations, just like he was among the people in the stories of the Bible, the ancient stories of the Hebrew people, and even some of the tribal people they connected to had some idea of who this great spirit was, this great creator. So it's true, it was true among the Hopi. So I began to use more, because I had Native heritage, and they knew I did, but I was still an outsider because I wasn't from their tribal people. And I do know that many of them still speak their language, the elders mostly, but the young people speak very little of the language, and almost no one can read the language that's been translated into the Bibles, because they didn't have a written alphabet. They didn't write they were an oral people. They were storytellers, and they would tell the stories over and over again, generation after generation. Those stories would be passed down. But I learned about a practice that's done among many of our tribal nations and the people, and it's called a talking circle. And so in the talking circle, we would pass a talking stick, and only the person with the talking stick could talk. And that's hard on people like the missionaries who want to do all the talking. They want to be in charge of the meeting, but when you pass that talking stick, you can't interrupt that person, even if you don't agree with them. You have an opportunity later if you want to, when you get the talking stick. But we started using these cultural practices, and I still noticed that we weren't connecting. So I began to use rewording of the scripture. I wasn't translating yet, but I had enough knowledge as a pastor, and I'd had some theological training and a little bit of training in Greek and Hebrew, enough not to get into too much trouble. So I began to just take simple things and work with some of the men in the talking circles, and I would introduce a verse, and then I would say, if we were going to say this verse using words from our own native culture, even though we're speaking English, how might we translate that in English to reflect our culture and our way of our worldview more. And so simple things like, instead of God, by the way, God isn't an inspired translation, the word God. It's a good word. It's especially good for German people, and for other nations, and it worked its way into English. So we use creator, which is biblical. We used great spirit or great mystery, and just those few changes. And instead of saying sin, we said broken ways, or we said bad hearts, depending on the context. And just those few changes made a huge difference in our meetings together. We were connecting culturally through English. That's a common language for all of our people now. And that's, even though that's been a bad thing, that language was forced on us and our languages were stolen from us, it's a good thing now, because we, at least good can come out of it, because we now can communicate with each other in many ways. And we have intertribal gatherings called powwows. And in these intertribal gatherings, there's storytelling that goes on the sidelines, inside maybe a teepee, and a storyteller will tell stories from their culture, and another one will come and tell stories from their cultures, but they're telling them in English, and so they have to kind of work the wording of the English in a way that makes sense culturally to them. So learning from that and reading Black Elk and some of the other native people from 100 years ago, that their words were translated into English directly from the Lakota language and other languages, I began to use those things as an example of how we could do this, working with the men and sometimes the women to create a reworded scripture. And one of the things that happened was, it was a beautiful way to do Bible study, because what's happening is to look at it, say, in standard English, and then to reword it from standard English, you have to figure out what it's saying in standard English. And then how do I get that culturally over to it? And again, the few changes that we made a difference. I wasn't even dreaming at that time that there would be a translation. I was hoping that maybe one existed, and I researched, couldn't find one. Eventually, as I did more and more of this rewording, we did a CD. My wife and I are recording artists also. We're songwriters. And so we did a CD. I recorded it in my home studio, called The Great Story from the Sacred Book. And we told from creation to Christ, a shortened version of that whole story, hitting the high points along the way. And then we had other Native people and leaders and help me with the wording. And we used this new wording we were creating. We were calling Jesus became creator sets free, because that's the meaning, one of the meanings of his name from his language. All the Hebrew people, their names had meaning, and many other in the Bible. And our names have meaning today, but people don't often connect to the meaning of our names. And we're not often named for the meaning of the name. We're often named because they like the sound of that name or something like that. But our traditional people, in our native way, our names were given to us, and they had meaning, and they helped form our identity as native people. And so we were using that in this rewording. So we would find the meaning. We'd say, Creator sets free, said to stands on the rock. So Jesus said to Peter, and it really began to help. So we recorded this whole CD. It's a great story from the Sacred Book. And someone said, you ought to submit that to the Native American Music Awards as in the spoken word category. So we did. And you're not going to believe this. We won the Best Spoken Word Award
Oh,
for the Native American Music Awards. I think it was in 2008. I have an award sitting up on a shelf.
yeah.
It was amazing to me that the story of the Bible had won a Native American Music Award because it was told in a way that related to our people and honored the way our people think and express themselves, especially in their mother tongues. And so eventually Darlene and I took that on the road, and we began to visit churches and powwows and reservations where they would let us sing our music. And we called ourselves Rain Song, First Nations Music and Storytelling. And so they would let us come in, and they knew we were telling stories out of the Bible, but they were okay with it because it had a native feel to it, you know, and an expression to it. And people listened, and some of the elders would come to me, the native elders, and they would say, "What Bible were you reading from?" And I'd say, "Well, we don't have a Bible like that yet. I just worked to reword some of the scriptures in English for native people." And they said, "Well, we need a Bible like that." And then another native leader said, "You say it in English the way we're thinking it in our original mother tongues." And so just from that experience, I people kept asking for a Bible. And I said, well, God will someday, I'm sure God will inspire someone to do this. And I found out that no, there was not one like that anywhere.
Yeah.
I did all the research I could. I even contacted mission organizations and asked about, are there any Bibles out there that just aren't in standard English? The English Bibles are fine, but they're written for another culture, and so anyway, eventually that led, it took about 10 years from 2003 when the seeds of this idea first got planted living there on the Hopi res, and it began to grow and grow and grow. I did more and more scriptures this way. And as we took it on the road, eventually people praying over us and different things said, "Terry, you ought to consider that maybe the Creator is calling you to do this." And I said, "Well, I'm not qualified to be a Bible translator." And they said, "Well, just pray." So I stepped out like Abraham going to a land I didn't have any experience in, and without knowing where I was going, except I said yes, and the doors began to open. We got involved in 2015. We got involved with a Bible translation organization, One Book of Canada, that came behind us, liked what we were doing, and gave us expertise, gave us credibility, and consultants. But they said, "You are the ones who are going to do the words." That's that organization was doing a lot of work in Africa. And they were saying it's the indigenous people, the tribal people, that have to word it, not the missionary. And the missionary can give them support and help from the Hebrew and Greek, but they're the ones that word it for their own people. And when it's done, they're the ones who own it as a people. It doesn't belong to the Bible translation organization. So we partnered with them, and we began the New Testament. So that's kind of the background behind that. That New Testament took me 5 years, I say, because we formed a translation council, many different tribes from different nations. We came together twice, one in Canada for 2 weeks, working with Wycliffe Associates and One Book, and then we went to Florida for a week to work with Wycliffe Associates Bible translators there. And we began to say, how are we going to do this? How is this going to come together? And can there be a group translation method we can apply to this? And so we finally did settle on one, but it turned out that since we're from so many different tribes and so many different backgrounds, and we're geographically separated from each other by hundreds and sometimes thousands of miles, we had to work on the internet. We used Google Docs and all shared the same one. They decided that I would be the lead translator to first word everything, because I had been working on this for a long time, but basing it from the Hebrew and the Greek, from the original languages. And so that's what we decided on. And it took 5 years to do the New Testament. We probably could have got it done faster, but I was pastoring a church also, half-time. And you know about half-time pastoring. It's only half-time pay. Anyway, that's kind of the story. And InterVarsity Press came along. They wanted to publish it. And let's see, it was 2021, August. They published the First Nation version New Testament. We had no idea how it would be received or what would happen. And it has just exploded in so many ways. And it's going all over the world. It truly is. We get feedback all the time from it. Not that everybody loves it, but that's okay. It's not for everybody. It's for primarily our Native people. And if it can be a blessing to others, let it be. Yeah. Let it be a gift of appreciation from our Indigenous peoples, or at least a group of us.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers your question, and we can get into some other things also. And you can ask a little more about some of the process if you like. But I love telling the story, and I'm trying to get it short, because it was over. I mean, we're talking, 15, 20 years of work here to try to pare that down to just a short story. But even telling that story has powerfully touched people and inspired others to translate in a different way. The Bible translator. So we've got feedback from that.
I mean, that's awesome. You've touched every notch of that question, and and I want to thank you again. And if for anyone listening who hasn't yet, I mean, it testament to how much work you've done in and also its success. I mean, you have about up to about 80 to 90% uptake of the translation across the tribal nations, and I mean that's a powerful testament to its relevance. It's something that has been missing, and everyone is seeing its value and also being touched by it as well. I mean, for people to come to you after hearing maybe a rendition of any of the stories in the Bible and asking you those questions just by approaching you, I mean, that's powerful alone. And someone wondering, what kind of Bible are you using? It's great opportunity to have very inspiring conversations around what you believe, and what better ways to connect with people. But I think one of the great takeaways from what you said is how these stories help bridge cultures, and it's a very powerful, inspiring testament to the power of storytelling, and especially with regards to translating sacred texts. It's also quite enlightening. I know in Africa, or maybe more specifically in Nigeria, we have three major languages. We have Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba. And for each of these, over the years since we encountered missionaries, we have a Bible in each of those languages. And we can't emphasize enough the value of actually hearing these messages and these stories in your mother tongue, because it allows you to connect, and love these stories to resonate with you as well. So it's done a lot of good for the missionaries. It's done a lot for the church, for the spreading of the word. But more importantly, it's done a lot of good for the people who receive those stories, because now the stories can actually germinate in your hearts and produce the fruits that that actually help you to heal and to embrace your identity as well. So thanks a lot for sharing that. And I recognize, and again, I must commend you. I mean, I recognize the humility in your voice, in your telling, when you recount, your credentials for being a translator. So you're not a professionally trained translator. I mean, this is something people go to university for years for, but yet you've been able to make so much impact. And I think this speaks to the humility that people or great translators come to their projects with. And you're doing a lot of this with a sense of responsibility. And given that there's a part in the book where you mentioned, part of one of the introductory chapters, where you mentioned that no translation is perfect.
Right.
So it's not just for the translator who is saying this, but also for anyone who is reading a work of translation to also keep in mind that no translation is perfect. So with a humble acknowledgement that translation is both an art and a responsibility, I want to ask, how do you balance faithfulness of the original text with honoring the indigenous ways of expression and storytelling?
That's a really good question, and I have responded to that in the past. And I'd like to say this. In Acts chapter 2, we discover on the day of Pentecost that many Jewish people who had been spread out into other nations had come for the festival to Jerusalem, and they are hearing the apostle or the disciples of Jesus who had gathered speaking in the languages of the nations of the people where they came from, telling of the good story of God, the good things of God. And the people are, what's amazing to me was this is a translation at work. The Holy Spirit is already doing the work of translation. And these are all Jewish people who are there, or proselytes who were listening. And so you would think that if God wanted to speak to them, he would speak in Hebrew or Aramaic. But no, he spoke in the languages of those nations. And I think it was a message that this story is not just for the Jewish people. It was for all the nations. It was something that was being modeled at the beginning. And then to find out that there was a Greek version of the what we call the Old Testament, the First Testament, the first story. There was a Greek version done of that. And in the New Testament, which is written in Greek, all of a sudden you've got another translation taking place. Actually, maybe a double translation, because you're getting some Hebrew that had been translated into Greek, and then you're getting some Aramaic that was translated into Greek also, that Jesus was speaking. So translation is happening right from the very beginning. So that gave me confidence that our Creator wants translation to happen, because translation, it's a challenge, and it's because translation isn't just words; it's culture taking place. You're going from one culture to another culture, and you have to find equivalent ways to say things in a new culture. Say the Greek culture that existed for the early books. Like Paul was working with many Greek-speaking people. Paul could speak Hebrew, and probably Aramaic, but also Greek. Although Paul always most of the time had everybody else write his scribes write his letters for him. But anyway, that gave me a lot of confidence, And the challenge is, some people have said, well, you've changed the Bible. And I said, every translation changes the Bible. Be honest about all translations, and they say, well, won't that cause problems? Won't it make some people think God's this way and other people think that God's that way? And I said, well, I've learned to kind of say, well, we have 45,000 Christian denominations. Even if we had one single Bible or translation that they could all read, that doesn't guarantee we're all going to read it the same, because we all have different perspectives based on where we grew up, who we learned from, what languages we spoke, what our cultures are, and things like that. So I often tell people what I'm trying to do is not to take away any of the meaning. Translation wants to bring out the meaning. And my goal was, and our goal was as a translation council, was to bring out the meaning to our native people so that they could relate to the words properly, especially since in our boarding schools, when words like sin were used, it's a sin to speak your language. It's a sin to have long hair. It's a sin to you have to wear these kinds of clothes. And so sin becomes a trigger word. You're punished for doing those things. And we wanted to get rid of this kind of colonial expression of English that was forced on our people. And we wanted to make sure none of those words that have lost their meaning for our native people, they would be translated in ways that would be meaningful. For example, we used for sin, we often used broken ways. Sometimes we use bad hearts and broken ways, because sometimes people try, but they just can't get there. Other times people don't try at all, and they just give themselves over to evil. And that is that it's found in the scriptures. There are both people who try hard but can't make it, and it says we all try hard, and none of us actually has made it. Not even Paul was talking to the Jewish people when he said everyone has come short of the glory of God. Everyone, even our people, speaking of his own people, have come short. And that was hard for his own people to hear, that they were in many ways just as bad shape as the Gentiles were. And that was not an easy message to hear for the Jewish people of Paul's day and stuff. But so we wanted to bring out the meaning, and so we were careful. We made sure we had consultants. We dug into the original language, into the Hebrew. We talked to other translators. We used the United Bible Society Translators Guide, which helps translators translate into other languages and other cultures. And that gave us some good things to help us with. And then we tried it out. We sent out samples of it. When we first got started, we sent out Luke and Ephesians to all kinds of indigenous pastors and leaders and people. I think we sent out about 300 copies. I think there's a misquote in our introduction that said 1,300. It was only 300, but 90% said, "Oh, this is good. It relates to us. We like it," and they gave us feedback on how we could even do it better. And so it's not the product of one person. We have a community of people who are working on these translations and the wording of these translations. I get to be the kind of the chief editor, or the lead translator, but man, I can't take credit for all the words. And of course it was a challenge, and you're probably going to go here. I try to anticipate questions. Since we have so many different tribes, how could we have just one translation in English, right? Well, we thought about that. And because of we're all speaking English, and we have intertribal gatherings. And in those intertribal gatherings, we speak to each other and tell each other our stories in English. So we felt that that it was okay to do sort of an intertribal translation, hoping to inspire other more tribally specific translations and to aid people, some of our native people who are working on translations into their own tongues, like the Blackfoot people. I have a friend now. His name is Vincent Yellow Old Owl, or Yellow Old Woman. No, Vincent Yellow Old Woman, and he's Blackfoot. I think he's 80 years old, and he's a Bible translator, and he's working on getting it into his language. And I got to meet him and talk to him about the First Nation version and everything. And I just love when we had him speak at one of our gatherings, and hearing him speak was like listening to the First Nation version, because he's a language speaker, one of the few that have really deeply knows his language. And so it reflects a little bit in English, how coming out from his language. And so those are some of the things that really inspired me, was just all the feedback that we were getting. And secondly, non-native people were really opening up to it. It brought the Bible in a new way to them, a refreshing way that many have told me. Even Bible translators, even professors who have said it's refreshed them, and stuff. So I hope I'm not over talking here. I want to get to all your questions.
No.
But those are just some of the things. It's just been an amazing journey for me. And when I get the feedback, and when I get the reports, and when I find out, oh my gosh, 100,000 copies have been sold of this translation, it's just, we couldn't imagine. I think of that scripture that says he can do far more than we imagine, more than we translate, than our weak minds can grasp, and he has done above and beyond what we expected to happen here. And we hope we hope it'll be a blessing to more people and inspire more projects like this.
Speaking of more projects, I know in our pre-recording conversation, we kind of hinted at creation stories. And I know all over the world, different cultures have different creation stories. One of the cultures that I am very fascinated by their creation stories is maybe by virtue of being an immigrant, and also a guest on this territorial land, is that of the First Nations. And if you can correct me if I'm wrong, you are the authority here. It vastly differs from creation story in the Bible, and a lot of other creation stories, of course, differ in details, in characterization, and all that. So with that, I have to ask, for you as a worship leader, a storyteller, first, how do you reconcile, whether theologically, or even thematically, how do you reconcile your knowledge of these creation stories with the biblical creation story, one, and how has this work deepened your understanding of God's voice and how he speaks differently through different languages and cultures?
Yeah. One of the things that there are creation stories that differ greatly among our indigenous peoples, but there's also some that have similarities. My own Anishinaabe people, the Ojibwe people, we have a creation story, And that creation story says the creator, Gitchimanidu, the great mystery, the creator, had a dream vision. And in that dream, he saw all the universe, everything that would be created. He envisioned it. And then he gathered all his thoughts and sent them out like beams of light into the emptiness. And we say the stars are the what's left behind of those beams of light that went out. But and then all creation came into being through him sending his thoughts out that way. And so I look at the Bible story and I say, well, there's some similarities here. There's one great creator, not many different ones. And this great creator envisioned everything, Of course, if you read beyond Genesis, you'll see that God envisioned all of creation. He envisioned us. And so, and how light was involved. Let there be light. And in some ways, words were involved, because when you take a thought and express that out, it becomes words. Okay? That's how words are an expression of thought. And so what I like to do is some creation stories by some of our indigenous people, that's another thing, are not creation stories. They're stories about how our people came into being. We came out of that lake over there. We came out of that canyon over there. That's how we began. We were underground, then we came to the surface and things like that. And there's a strong connection in almost all of our indigenous North American stories to the earth, and how that the earth and that we are connected to the earth very closely. My Anishinaabe story actually has us being created out of the earth, just like the biblical story, And so what I look for is, what kind of story is this that's being told? How might I misunderstand the meaning of that story, because I don't know that culture. I don't know how they think about it. And so I need to really, if I want, I need to become a learner and a listener so that I can understand this story, because stories often have purpose. Some of our stories are somewhat mythological, but that mythology tells something that's true. And again, when we look at the biblical creation story found in Genesis, written in the Hebrew language, not everybody agrees about what that story, how it happened, okay, and what it means. So I've researched many theologians and others, and said, wow, we're not all looking or interpreting this story the same way. So that gave me some courage to say, let's find, when we hear different creation stories, let's listen. Let's see if there's common ground here. Let's find out the purpose of the story. Why was that biblical creation story told in the way it was told? Yeah. And what was it, a scientific presentation of creation? Probably not. At least not in our modern scientific understanding. And isn't it interesting how we take our modern scientific views and impose them onto Genesis chapter 1 and 2. We impose our views. And isn't that the opposite of what we're supposed to do? Aren't we supposed to find out what it meant to the people back then, what it meant in their culture, and what the purpose of that story was? Because there's always a purpose to stories, and it's not just words. It's to provide a foundation for understanding how and why the world is the way it is, and why we are the way we are. And some of our native stories creation stories and other stories tell the same story, but not with the same images. It still comes out, oh, we're this way because of this, and we need to understand that many of us, I've heard a lot of elders say, we lost our original instructions, and we left the Creator's path, and we had to be restored back to it. And a lot of our native stories are about losing our way, and then once again, Creator sends somebody to help restore the way back again for us, that good road to walk and such. And so I don't look at stories and say, oh, these stories are contradictory, so therefore this one's wrong and this one's right. I just say, what is right about all stories? What can I find? And then how can I understand the story from their perspective instead of my own? And as we work on Genesis, we're working on Genesis right now, our translation council, especially that first part there, we've gone deeply into the meaning behind the story. And I've met with theologians at Wheaton University. I met with he wrote the Genesis books on Genesis. His name is escaping me for the moment, and it shouldn't. John Walton, and he wrote a book called Theology: The Lost Worlds of Genesis, and he presents a creation story much different than some of them I was brought up with in church, and that helped us understand a little better, because he goes back into the Near Eastern culture and how they viewed the universe and how they viewed things, and the Hebrew people were part of that culture, and they would be influenced by it much and such. So anyway, I think that answers the question. It's a challenge, but it's also, I think, a privilege to hear each other's stories.
I mean, just, borrowing an analogy you used, or rather a reference that you used in your answer, with regards to how our origin stories as opposed to creation stories, where you mentioned how some stories tell of how we are from the earth. I remember also certain elements in the book that I really connected with, and kind of piqued more curiosity in my head with regards it were those that related to gendering in this translation, and how you were very careful or sensitive about the difference in terms of how, for instance, in the Greek and Hebrew translations, the gender of God is being addressed or being represented, and how you are very careful about how you were translating those elements, regards, especially the ones related to gender. And I could see the connection with how, first we see God as male, as opposed to, I would say, another way of seeing God, where the gender that we ascribe as definite is really an expression of a quality that God has, of the many qualities that God has.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the values that or benefits I got from reading this book, which is whenever I read, and especially with beings, reading about beings, the spirit, or with God, the genders that we hear in the translations that we're reading were not necessarily definite or final, but rather expressions of equality. And I could understand how that would be different in a First Nation translation, because I would say a lot of the attributes of the all being might be, or the creator, have a very maternal feel, or representation to them, Mother Earth, and or earth father. And the other layer to the benefits or the elements that I also really appreciated in the book were the epithets that you used. So rather, maybe better put, the epithets or the attributions by epithets that are known to be used in First Nation tradition, oral tradition, as opposed to the very definite attributions or normatives that are used. So you would rather say John, but in First Nation oral tradition, you'd say the one most loved, the one most loved.
Right.
And I appreciate some. I could connect with that. I could connect. I could really. It's something I could really hold on to and appreciate for how profoundly it's expressed a quality of John, for instance, that I could easily dismiss at first reading, on my first reading. And I want to appreciate that just for a moment. Now, the Psalms and Proverbs that we're used to, that are full of rhythm and poetry and emotion. How did indigenous storytelling traditions help bring those elements to life in this new translation?
That's a really good question. One of the things that Native people understand, male and female genders, and we often gender everything. The earth is gendered, Mother Earth. The sky is gendered, Father Sky. In many of our tribal languages, and so what that is about is understanding that the Creator wants everything to be connected in harmony and in balance. Okay, and you'll find that that's a general way of thinking, that harmony and balance are what's important, and that God has put human beings here. You can read this in I think it's Psalms 8, where it says, "Why does God care so much for human beings?" Right? That's a good question. Why does He care so much for human beings? Why does He watch over them so closely? And then we often miss the answer to that is in the Psalms, right there. It says, because He gave them the earth to take care of. They're supposed to take care of the earth and the plants and the animals, and it lists all those things. So God is taking care of us so that we will take care of His creation. And so that's that's one of the things. And if you go to Genesis chapter 1, you'll find out that that's why human beings were placed here, was to take care of creation, to represent the Creator to all creation. We were His likeness, His representatives. And our Native people have our ceremonies are about restoring when harmony and balance is lost, and that's what happened in Genesis. Harmony and balance was lost between the Creator and the humans, and between the humans and the earth, because it was the ground that would no longer, the earth, Mother Earth, would no longer give her gifts so easily. They would have to work hard, so there was a connection broken with the earth. Because of breaking connection with the Creator, it broke a connection with the earth, because Creator made the earth to be a certain way, to provide for us, to be a mother that nurtures us and provides us with food and air and just everything. And so you have both those aspects, male and female, like in Genesis, when God says this human should not be alone. And out of the side of the human, Creator gave male and female. Okay, that is harmony and balance. They were to exist together equally, demonstrating aspects of the image of our Creator in different ways. And when women and men are in conflict with one another, that is broken. And that's part of what happened. That conflict went to their children, and their children were killing each other. I mean, and then human beings just went down that whole wrong path. But so I think if you go to Psalms 8, and we bring that out a little more, and but also Proverbs. Now this is probably one of the most challenging. You have Lady Wisdom found in the early Proverbs, spoken of a whole lot. This feminine wisdom personification. Okay, and so I think it's in Proverbs. I think it's chapter 8, where mother, or we say grandmother wisdom. We call her grandmother wisdom. We call the creator grandfather. And there's a story behind that. But here's grandfather and grandmother wisdom creating all that exists. So here it honors the feminine and masculine aspects of the character or of the creator. Not that the creator is male or female, but male and female reveal some of his character and nature in different ways. And if male and female are not in harmony, then it breaks creator's purpose and plan for the planet, for all of the earth. And so I love the way that the feminine is really brought out in Proverbs there, because some translations kind of gloss over it a little bit, because every time the word wisdom is used in the Hebrew, it's always feminine, always, and so for Native people, different genders aren't really about necessarily making hard lines between things, because things overlap. Everything overlaps and affects everything else. And so our ceremonies have to do with recognizing when harmony and balance has been broken. How do we restore it? And our ceremonies are prayers to help restore the way things are supposed to be. If you in our Anishinaabe, we have 7 sacred teachings: love, wisdom, respect, truth, humility. All these sacred teachings, they're the core value of what we as Anishinaabe people believe is the right way to live. And then our ceremonies were to reinforce these teachings the same way that the Hebrew ceremonies were to reinforce the Torah and the teachings that the Creator had been giving them. So I see a commonality there. And so in our translation, we brought out more of the feminine to the surface of the translation. And I believe it brings a new kind of balance as we read the Hebrews. The Hebrews were patriarchal. Much of our Native people are matriarchal. Okay, so there's a tension there. But it's not that one's better than the other. It's just a different perspective. And what if we could just bring those perspectives together and really see how it's influenced our thinking and everything? And so we have grandfather, we have grandmother, that's in there, and other places too where we kind of ungendered things, so to speak, like you were talking about. Wherever we could, there's sometimes where the gender is important part of the story. And there's times when the gender really has nothing to do with the story. And so it's trying to identify those places and then bring them to the surface. The Hebrew, especially even more than the Greek, the Hebrew has roots of meanings. I consider it like a plant that has many roots. And this plant here draws from the soil different stuff from the soil than this root does. Okay, so there's a different way to express that truth from the Hebrew. And so what we did is instead of looking at it through Western eyes, we tried to look at it through indigenous eyes and say, okay, I like this root better. This better expresses how we understand the Creator. Well, is that biased? Yeah, but all translations have bias. We just pretend they don't. But every good translator will tell you that there is bias in translations, and we try to keep it out, but sometimes it's important for communication within a culture to have a cultural bias.
Thank you so much for that. And I want to be very respectful of your time. So I have one quick last question. If you could summarize the heart of this project, I mean, the message you hope stays with readers long after they've closed the book, what would it be?
Well, one of the things that happened to me many, many years ago, in terms of this whole project, okay, is I was in prayer, and I was praying about this project, and to be honest with you, I've been, at times I was terrified at what I was doing. I was nervous about what I'm doing. I'm handling sacred stuff here, sacred things, and I know there's going to be people that disagree with it, and I was praying, and I had a picture in my mind, and I saw all these earthenware jars, like clay pots, and I saw like many clay pots in front of me, at different sizes, and each of them had symbols on them from different cultures. There was I saw a Hebrew word symbol on there. I saw some of the indigenous people's symbols on these pots, and then Chinese, and I mean, if you could imagine, and there were just hundreds and hundreds of them in my view, and I'm looking at all these pots and thinking of all the different cultures, and in the picture in my mind, a hand came in with a big pot and started pouring water into each of these pots. All these different cultures. Water was entering the pot. And the picture, the message I got from there was that our Creator is taking some of His grace, His multifaceted grace, and He's pouring that grace into different cultural expressions and people groups. And the whole idea to me of the gospel is to find and drink from each of those cultures that He brings before us, is to see it as living water that Creator wants to provide. And that if we don't respect that culture, if we don't see that Creator has put something in there for everybody, then we'll miss out on some of the grace that He wants to offer through all of us. So my question is, will you drink water from an indigenous pot? And that goes for everybody. So that I often leave those thoughts with people. We hope that our translation will be a step in that right direction of honoring a culture of many people, not just one culture, hundreds of cultures here in North America, and showing a beauty from the Creator that the standard culture just doesn't present. It's almost like different painters. We love the different painters and artists because they do it differently. Can you imagine if every painter painted exactly the same? There would be no, look at that. What a different way of seeing. What a different way of understanding. Look at the way they put those colors together. I would have never thought to put the colors together like that, And so it's that same kind of idea, and that's where what we're going for, and hoping for, and we hope this will spread not only from our indigenous people here, but all around the world. We can begin to respect each other, to listen to each other, to not think that it's our job to impose the gospel on anyone. We're to bring this gospel as a story to compare to their story, and to see where our stories have common ground and where we can come together.
That's so beautiful, and I do share in your hope as well. So it is traditional, pun intended, for on this show to have something of fun, rapid fire questions to ask our guests, just to wind down.
Okay.
Before we say goodbye. You ready?
Okay.
What was your favorite book you loved as a child?
My favorite book I loved as a child. Boy, that's a good question. I know it's supposed to be rapid fire.
No pressure.
You threw me off there. Let me. I loved The Night Before Christmas. It was a poem, a big poem, and I read it as a child. It was just like a storybook form, and I just loved it. I loved the imagery in there that was in there. So that was one of my favorites as a child. Yeah.
Sweet. I'll definitely check it out. If you could have lunch with any author, living or dead, who would it be?
Wow. Oh, living or dead?
Living or dead?
An author.
Yes.
Right now, I miss Richard Twist so much. He was a Lakota man who has written books. And I have sat down with him before, but I would love to sit down with him again and let him know all that's been going on since he walked on.
Oh my! What has he written? What book has he written?
He wrote the book called One Church, Many Tribes, and a second one called Rescuing the Gospel from the Cowboys.
All right. I will definitely put links to that, so in case anyone wants to do some further close reading. Coffee, tea, or something else entirely when you're writing?
Coffee.
Okay.
Stay awake medicine.
Oh, really? That works for you. Okay. In one word, how would you describe this project?
Hopeful.
I hear that. Okay, Terry, in winding down or closing out, do you have a traditional way or expression for saying goodbye?
Yeah, we say, well, depending on our dialect, we say, I'll say the simple one that comes from Michigan, Bamapi. And that means, I'll see you again. And we say, Miigwech, Bizindaoye. Thank you for listening.
Oh, man, that's beautiful. I couldn't have said it better. Terry, thank you so much for your time, your generosity, and for the spirit of this gift that you've shared with this world. Thank you so much.